comments on the last meeting? If not, can I just get a wave yes if you approve?
This is Candace, and I do have one minor change.
I can barely hear you, Candace. Can you speak up?
Let me try this again. Cooperate. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
My last name is spelled with an AC at the end, not an ICE. It's very minor. It's just kind of a pet peeve.
That's a mistake we shouldn't have made. We will gladly correct that.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So from my hand waving, I see minutes approved. Any additional feedback from last month's County Road 81 update at all from anyone? Anybody have any feedback? Or I've talked with Felicia a little bit. I talked with Sophia. Basically, I've had some changes on some business people. I did some door knocking, probably 15, 18 different businesses. And now that they're starting to get a little bit of tempo, they're getting a little bit more freewheeling. They would like to see some different proposals other than 81. I'm going to be setting up a meeting with Greenberg, who is the community action person, and try to talk to him, see what he's hearing, just to try to get the left side and the business side and the community side together to see if he's hearing the same thing. So those are the feedbacks that I've had. Has anybody else had any feedback since last meeting at all? Okay. Note made. Introduction and anti-displacement discussion. Sophia, you want to jump in on that, or do you want to take that?
Yeah, we will turn that over to C. Terrence Anderson, who is from the Center of Urban and Regional Affairs, or CURA. And him and I believe other members of the team are online to kind of introduce themselves and start getting everyone familiar with the work that's to come and start the discussion and all that kind of stuff. So I will turn it over to him to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia. It's good to see everybody. My name is C. Terrence Anderson. I'm the Director of Community Programs at the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, Akira. I'm joined by Ed Getz, who is the Executive Director of CURA. And I believe Madeline Geitz as well is in here. She's a research, research associate at CURA as well. So there's the three of us. It's early in the morning. Some of our other members, they're dropping off kids at school and that kind of thing. So it's just the three of us this morning. But I'll kind of talk about the broader project team. I apologize. I'm a little bit more clunky on WebEx. Is probably the one that I know the least. So I just apologize if I misshare anything. And I'm also just kind of awkward online more than I think I am in person. So I apologize for that too. But we're really, really excited to be here today to talk about this anti-displacement work, which I understand all of you have been waiting for quite some time. And so I think we're pretty close to kicking this thing off. Generally, what I heard from Sophia is to sort of just broadly give an overview of the work that we had planned. So I think we're going to talk about that. I have a little presentation format. I'm going to share 2 documents in just a second. I figured out how to do that in WebEx too. So I'll share 2 documents that includes both our full proposal as well as the broader schedule that we had planned. But I think, the biggest thing that I want to keep sort of setting the impression and the expectation for is that we proposed a body of work responding to an RFP. And along with it, what we named a lot within our proposal was, hey, we really want to co-design, co-create this work that's happening, because at the end of the day, whether we're brought in as experts or not, the center of this work is sort of capacitating all of you, and along with sort of the new creation of the anti-displacement work group, to sort of be able to create a vision for this corridor yourselves, one that fully repairs and fully harms or fully addresses the possibility of displacement as a result of the Blue Line extension. So I hope that all of you feel the invitation and welcome and our desire for y'all to really see places within what we're proposing to say, hey, I would like for y'all to do this, or like for y'all to do more, or that doesn't make sense to me. This makes more sense. I think it, like, again, we're really trying to co-design this work and this process, and one that best honors and capacitates y'all to do the important work that you see out of this as well. So I'm going to share 2 files. Let's see if I can figure that out real quick. So that includes the full proposal. And, oh, this is sharing the screen. Okay, so I might have to come back to this. I think Sophia maybe will email these things out. I do have a presentation that's a little bit easier for us. Again, WebEx I'm the most clunky on in comparison to all of them. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's see if that's right. So hopefully y'all can see a presentation. I think y'all can see a presentation now. Let me know, please let me know if I can do anything different again. So yeah, here to talk about the Blue Line Extension anti-displacement work, joined by Ed and Max. So who am I? So I'm C. Terrence Anderson. I'm at the university. We're called the principal investigator for this project, or the person leading this project at CURA. But I'm the director of community programs, which basically means I sort of direct and oversee and manage a number of different programs, which hopefully a lot of you have heard of. That include, some grant making, some community-based research. We have 2 organizers on staff, who I'll talk about in just a minute, who are part of organizing projects. We do some ArtX data visualization stuff that we call our Public Policy Design Lab, which helps sort of demystify, deconstruct complex data into more accessible forms. A lot of partnerships in community we've been doing over the past 50 years around really doing the same thing, capacitating community to sort of fully understand complex policy issues and supporting them to have vision over what can change. So CURA, we're a public policy research center at the University of Minnesota. We were created in 1968, I believe, the last time that we had a really large racial reckoning around injustice in the cities during the civil rights movement. And we're created to better understand the conditions that led to sort of the racial unrest of the 1960s and leverage our resources over our time to ensure that's not the continuing paradigm. And so I think this work is really aligned with our original mission, and we can continue to do that work. So the project team that we have is myself. You might have heard of or met Dr. Brittany Lewis, who's done a lot of great work some years. Dr. Getz, who's here, Ed, who's here today. Ned Wickmore and Millie Colt-Shabazz, who are the 2 organizers who are on our staff, to largely organize in the context of neighborhood associations, but also kind of more broadly than that. Jeff Matson, who leads our community GIS. So if you sort of are looking to map data, Jeff is often the guy that a lot of community members come to find and map that data as it sees fits. We have Kristen Murray, who you also might know of in her role at Juxtaposition Arts. But she also is on staff at CURA. She leads our public policy design lab and artist neighborhood partnership initiative, so grant making around art making. So she will be joining this project as well. Who's now a new doctor, Dr. Tony Damiano, who is, I think he's a postdoc right at CURA. Now has a transition from a graduate research assistant. So Tony, Ed, and Brittany were a huge part of our gentrification study, our gentrification and displacement study of a couple of years ago, which I'll kind of briefly talk about, or Ed will probably join in and talk about. We're joined by 2 consultants in this project team, Allison Bell from Bellwether Consulting, and Margaret Kaplan from the Housing Justice Center. And what I can really say about this project team is that a lot of us have been around housing and displacement and gentrification and transit in particular for almost our entire career. So I started my career in the Twin Cities at Metro Transit. So I kind of worked alongside Sophia initially when I moved here. Primarily worked on the C line and a little bit on the D line as well. And of course, Ed and Brittany, who've been focusing a lot of their work on gentrification and displacement. Tony as well. Allison Bell also used to work at Metro Transit, but had kind of transitioned. I think she initially was in. She was the equity manager for some time at Metro Transit, but as well, I think she was at the transit-oriented development office. So she brings a lot of background around that work. And then Margaret Kaplan, who leads the Housing Justice Center, has been steeped in housing issues and the construction of housing for quite some time. And so I think we bring a lot of experience around this work, but again, we're not here to sort of dictate what the things are to happen, but I think we bring I think a compelling support to all of you and the new anti-displacement work group into sort of bringing vision and work around anti-displacement centered in the Blue Line Extension project. So really excited to bring this team. Is there any questions? I want to always make sure if folks have questions, feel free to ask them. Does that make sense? Just pausing. Any questions about us? I'll keep going then. So I think, oh, sorry, was there a question? Okay, sorry, I thought I heard somebody. I think really more than just explaining who we are as individuals, I think it's really big for us to explain the framework that we bring into not just this work, but to any work. So we call this our reparative justice framework. And I think it really centers why we're interested in this work, but also more importantly, how we practice this work. So we would say ultimately equity or reparative justice or the way that we work in community are centered kind of in three main parts. Our work is contextualized, it's community centered, and we believe it's reparative. So contextualization, we really mean is oftentimes governments will come to us and say, hey, help us make our work more equitable. And our first question is, well, what inequity in history are you responding to? If sort of the response is like, well, just generally inequity in history, we just want to make this project fit to be more equitable. Kind of our response is that doesn't make any sense, or we don't really know how to process and answer the question from that perspective, because we really center and we need to respond specifically to the injustices of the past, specifically with work done today. And so we really start with contextualizing into specific harms and really understanding the harms and the depth of them, who was impacted by those harms, to what extent were they impacted by those harms, really is sort of the beginning of the work that we do. And then sort of secondly, the community that is most impacted or most negatively impacted by those inequities in history need to be at the forefront of creating vision and going forward and the work going forward to address those harms. So sometimes I like to say, if I hurt you as an individual, who among us gets to decide what healing looks like? And I think most people would say the people that are harmed to get to decide what healing looks like. And so we really start our work with those folks who are most impacted, who continue to sort of experience those negative impacts or that harm from those historical inequities, need to be at the forefront of creating solutions going forward in the future. And then lastly, what we'd say is, ultimately we're working forward is a fully reparative vision. So creating solutions that are equal in impact to what caused the inequity in the first place. So sometimes I like to say, if I took your car, I lit it on fire and I kicked it into the Mississippi River, then I come back a couple years later and say, hey, what I did was wrong. I really want to make this right. Here's a new pair of shoes, right? Most people would say that pair of shoes is not good enough as a replacement for a burned car thrown into a river. We need to replace a car for a car. And so when we think about this work, anti-displacement, when we think about any of the sort of the justice-oriented work, we're thinking about, as we fully understand the harms that have happened in history, how do we sort of fully point towards a vision that fully repairs that harm, or that's equal in impact to what creates the harm. And so I think a lot of that centers around sort of our research approach, or what we're sort of interested in, or how we sort of center in the work that we're doing. In the context of displacement, we're talking about what caused sort of the instability or the vulnerability amongst this community or this corridor that we're talking about. who are those people who need to be front and center in co-creating the vision going forward in the future? And then how are we sort of setting folks up to sort of putting forward one that's fully reparative of the harm that is either has happened or might happen as a result of blue line extension. So we think, this sort of fits in with a broader theory of change, or what I call a theory of change, is that we present a body of research that is actionable, so that is workable, right? It's not just this research that ends up into a journal somewhere, but is used for a practical purpose of putting forward some sort of policy or investment that leads to the outcomes that we want. And so we see our research sitting alongside advocacy and organizing to get to the best policy change possible. So I think in this context, the folks who are in this room, you might see yourselves fitting in that sort of advocacy and organizing sort of part of the pie, or part of the ingredients that we're getting to that policy change policy. So we view ourselves as delivering a body of research to sit alongside, of course, your experiences, your constituencies, and your communities to fully flesh out a vision of the policy or investments going forward. So I think it's really important for us to sort of look at, like, how do we view ourselves within the context of this? Where does this work sit alongside you, right? I think it's not to supersede you, or not to silence you, or not to sort of say, hey, what you might be thinking might not be right. It's really to capacitate for you to fully see what you need to see in order to sort of make the best recommendations possible to Hennepin County, the Met Council, and of course the other governments, the different cities along the corridor, so that we're doing something real. We're not just doing something that's theoretical, it's actionable, it has impact, and all the things that we want to see when we're doing this work. So I think our method, and I just really want to explain this just because I wanted it for folks. And Sophia, let me know how I'm doing on time. I don't know if I'm the only agenda item or if there's other agenda items, so let me know if I need to speed through any of these things too.
You're basically the main agenda item, and if we don't fully get to the other ones, that's okay.
Okay. So, traditionally, I think often universities and other researchers are viewed what we think is sort of the drop-in model of research. So we kind of come in with our own questions and hypothesis and methods, and we drop into y'all as community leaders to extract data and information. Then we sort of leave the community to sort of do the analysis and deliver the report to a journal or a government, whoever is asking for it. So this is often the model of research that I think folks sort of think about, like, you're just coming to extract from me and then sort of own the expertise and the decisions and the meaning, making meaning of it yourself and going forward. Where we sort of view ourselves as sort of what we call the live-in model of research. So we sit alongside community leaders with our different tools and expertises, but together we ask the questions, together we make meaning of the data and the information that we get. We sort of come to agreement about the methods that we put forward to sort of get that meaning, and we sort of develop the hypothesis together. But ultimately, the research is actionable to the community leaders to get to, in this case, what does anti-displacement investment and policy look like? So this is the model, this is the theory that I work with, and we really just wanted to center that because I think it's really important to know what's in the background for CURA and why we approach the work that we do. But also for you to see, like, if you disagree with this, we can have a more transparent and open conversation about what y'all sort of view as maybe the more appropriate approach to doing this work. But this is the theory behind what we presented ultimately for the work that we did. So if there's no questions, and of course, please, folks, feel free. I can't see a chat or anything in here, so you might have to come on mute if there's any questions in there. But I can't see them, or I don't know how to see them in this mode. But one of the things I would say is that CURA has a long body of work around gentrification and displacement. This image is from a report that was done, Ed, was it in 2017? I think it was in 2017. That we did. We have a big report, which we can make sure you get a link to, that we did around gentrification and displacement in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I think it was a pretty seminal body of research that we have done that I think has kind of made us kind of the premier institution within the Twin Cities that sort of focuses on this work. this map sort of reflects some of the findings that we found in the work, but I think we'll both explain what we currently see. What both this slide, I think, recognizes that we already know that gentrification and displacement exist in the Twin Cities. You can see it in the areas that are labeled dark blue and labeled light blue. And of course, Ed, if you want to talk about any of this, because this was your research, please do. But I think what I like to explain about this slide is that you can sort of see where we see the possibilities or effects of gentrification and displacement alongside existing light rail investments, stadium investment, and of course, future planned LRT and BRT. So you can see, I'm sure y'all are familiar where the blue line extension is on this map, as well as where things like the C line and D line are as well. And you can sort of see where we already are seeing gentrified communities and also communities that are vulnerable to those risks as well. And I remember being a community outreach coordinator at Metro Transit, and there might be two, and I think there's kind of two ways that folks talk about it, both the way that we talk about it in government and how folks in community talk about it. So remember, talking about the C line of like, hey, this is really exciting, finally investing in sort of historically disinvested communities, creating further access, and oftentimes I think the Met Council sort of talks about this as sort of these equitable projects, and I don't think that that's I think that's a view that I think is worthy to be talked about. But I also remember in conversations with community, folks would be asking me like, is this going to displace me out of my home, or what are the, is this going to raise my rent, right? Is this going to make taxes unaffordable for me as a homeowner? And so you can sort of see these two views that might exist, government saying, hey, this is the good work that y'all have been always been asking for, and then other residents saying like, hey, is this going to sort of further the harm that we're experiencing? And so being really comfortable within that conversation, just because I've been in it with years, I think sets probably a lot of the context that that y'all have exactly within this project. Hey, some folks saying, hey, this blue line extension is this great thing that we've been asking for a long period of time, and then of course a lot of other members in community saying, what's the negative impact that's going to have on me? And as we've set up, putting in this proposal, we've talked a lot with community about this exact dynamic, or this sort of paradigm that sort of exists within transit investment that sort of sets the context here. And so I think we bring in both all the lessons that we've been part of directly studying around the existing Green Line, both the Green Line extension and the existing Green Line between downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the existing Blue Line that exists today. There's a lot of lessons around those different projects that I think we already bring into this. And then of course, we have to say, right, the Blue Line project, I'm sure as all of you know, already has a history in Minneapolis. It already has effects within the context of displacement, say, particularly in the Harrison neighborhood, which studies have already aligned with. So again, what I really want to mention about this is that we don't need to start from zero. We don't plan to start from zero in this work. I'm sure all of you walked into this with some understanding of this exact dynamic. And we don't intend on sort of pretending that y'all don't already have opinions, or that there already isn't studies that you read, or already have experiences around this work. More importantly, we need to bring that within the context as lessons learned, but more importantly, as vision casters for what might need to happen around the existing project of the Blue Line extension. Ed, was there anything that you wanted to add in about this slide, or anything about our previous displacement and gentrification work?
The only thing I would add is that gentrification is important in this dynamic, but displacement can and does happen without it. I think our study of gentrification, and any study of gentrification, looks at a threshold of neighborhood change, but displacement can happen both above and beyond and below that threshold. So they're related, they're importantly related, but I don't think they're this all the time the same phenomenon. So
And see, Terrence, thanks. This is, as Ed says that, it's interesting that as Ed says it that way, because we specifically did not, as we wanted to put this working group together, did not call it anti-gentrification working group or a gentrification working group, because we felt that as well. What we really want to focus on here is minimizing displacement, which can happen because of gentrification, but of course can happen for so many other reasons as well, as Ed said. So that's, thanks for that observation, because that's part of where we want to help guide, use your guidance to help with that just fact in general.
Right on. Was there any questions about our previous research, or I think maybe a question, Sophia, you had when we talked last Friday was, do we want to define any of these things like displacement or gentrification? But I don't know where folks in this meeting are at about anything quite. Obviously, we're going to dig a lot into this over the next 18 months, but just in case there's any questions.
Hi, C. Terrence. This is Felicia. I think, given, the size and diversity of even this group, I think it's important to define it and define it, within you all's framework. So we're all operating from, that similar definition, as we're both working alongside with you, and as we're talking about you all's work in the communities we're in.
Awesome. Ed, do you want to take that?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right and very important. I think that there are a lot of ways to think about displacement, and that probably needs to be one of the very first items in our work schedule, is to talk about what we collectively mean by displacement, what's inside that concept, and what's perhaps outside that from everyone's point of view. So I think that's an important item of work we have ahead of us with all of the stakeholders.
So you're saying you want to, Ed, so to clarify, you want to, instead of sort of in starting like what the definition that might have been at work, we should probably co-define it within the context of this project.
Well, I think so. I mean, there are multiple ways to think about displacement, and I think previous researchers have documented those, and there are lots of different dimensions. Are you only worried about people who are directly forced to move? What about indirect displacement? How many different stages of indirect influence are you going to look at? And then some people talk about exclusionary displacement, changes in the local housing market that make a neighborhood no longer accessible to people who used to be able to move in. I don't know whether the group wants to go that far, or whether the group does want to sort of investigate that phenomenon as well. So I do think that it's probably worth a conversation with the stakeholders.
Is that helpful, Felicia, or is there any further way we can go around that?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like it's helpful for me. I've worked or I've experienced you all's work before. What I'm thinking about right now too, as we're talking about this, is just wanting to encourage you all to definitely tap into the engagement cohort. I'm sure you will. Particularly around this discussion, I think the main places I've heard it come up are both on the BAC and in the engagement cohort space, as like every single meeting we're talking about this, or we're talking about it with the communities that we're in. So I would just encourage you all to really tap into there, as far as like having, robust conversations about it, and just really wanting to encourage other members of the BAC to, even if this is not work that you've done before, to lean into it and absolutely ask questions. And we can't assume that everybody is thinking the same thing or feeling the same way. But I found that these kind of conversations really can lead to some creative problem solving and creative like we get creative and our minds expand a little bit more on how we can approach some of the challenges and issues that we're inevitably going to have with a project such as this. So thank you.
I really appreciate that, Felice. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think, I just to jump to the next slide, and we can come back to this slide around that. I think I have a slide later on in the presentation, but I think, I think what we what my experience often has been when I worked within governments, and I won't say explicitly the Met Council, but including I think at the Met Council, sometimes sometimes a lot of what the engagement process will be to try to simplify very complex problems, because it can be very hard to sort of dig into the complexity in whatever the allotted amount of time that there might be to do engagement. I think that we want to capacitate y'all as much, or to really dive into the complexity and make sense of the complexity, because I think it's in the details of that complexity that this work is sort of most impactful. And so I think, yeah, really getting on the same page about what we mean by displacement, what's a displacement to be sort of cared for is of principal importance, because again, if we're not getting to the outcomes that within your experiences, within your constituency and communities are really important, then we're really falling short in this project. And so I really appreciate that. And yeah, I think our full hope is to really dive into the complexities of these things, so that y'all sort of have all the information and knowledge to sort of create powerful vision at the end of the day. So thank you for that. I think I saw some, oh, sorry, yep.
Yep. Hi, this is Sam. There is a question in the chat, and I think it's a little hard for you to read it. So I'm just going to read it out loud, and it comes from Candace. And whenever you want to be able to address this in your presentation, but Candace is stating she has a concern about the industrialization that developing rail lines bring to local neighborhoods. So Candace, do you want to say more about that question?
Just a little bit. It is a matter, and I've lived in many areas, starting with when I grew up in Chicago eons ago. The fact that the neighborhood inevitably changes as these projects develop. Part of it is the heavy rail lines, and that is a separate discussion. But it does bring the same feel. You're no longer a small community, you're part of a much larger train, which also changes the kind of development that may come into an area.
Yeah, thank you, Candace. And I think maybe I can see the chat now. What Jessie said, I couldn't hear her. What I broadly understood from your question, or sort of your concern, is that the rail lines being implemented in different neighborhoods might change the character of those neighborhoods, including what types of businesses or the presence of businesses along those lines, and sort of the broader, what I hear is negative impacts from doing that,
Exactly.
and sort of how that might be the case. Yeah, we'll definitely want to talk more about that. I'll talk about a little in our research plan, but part of it is we're going to look very, detailedly into what happened within the existing green line and blue line, including the green line extension, around those different impacts. And of course, a lot of folks will make a lot of comparisons, in particular what happened along University Avenue between downtown in Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul, around the green line extension. So we intend for sure to study the potential changes that could occur. And there's a lot of discussion. I mean, because governments, of course, will be talking about zoning and land use changes around lines to sort of accommodate different, differing businesses or types of housing. And so I think a lot of that is going to be held within this process to sort of create. I think it would be better to create vision around what the desired changes that community would have around that, versus it sort of happening to them. And so I think we're going to try to dig into that as much as we can within the context. And now remember that point when we were talking about the research plan. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off, Candace. But yeah, I totally understand that, and I think there's a plan that we at least putting forward to care for that. But if you don't see everything that you want in that plan, then please, we're looking for that guidance and to co-create what that looks like too.
I don't know if you can see, but Mike has a raised hand if you're looking at your participant group.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And Terrence, as a co-chair of the BAC, this is a very first foray for me into anti-displacement and gentrification. So there's been a lot of higher level discussion going on For my edification, and at some point we need to back it up so we can start at a very rudimentary level and kind of build on top of that, because I want to understand the process fully, and I want to make sure I get a fully informed decision right from the beginning versus jumping in half count conversation and not knowing what you're talking about. So I would appreciate that context if possible.
Right on. That's as a general comment to moving as we move forward, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Right on. Yep, definitely. So just to jump forward, if there's no more questions in the chat, which I can't see right now. So a big question, I think this is a little bit more of a discussion item between this group and the other advisory committees, and of course community as a whole, is a big part of this work is the formation of the anti-displacement work group, which we talk about in the proposal as well, which I'll get a full copy of the proposal. Of course, we can imagine that the folks who will be in this group are people who are given our values and sort of how we sort of view this work and process moving forward in the most preparative manner. Obviously, I think the members of this group should be people in community who are potentially most impacted from the context of displacement as a result of implementing the Blue Line extension. So, what we broadly heard, what Hennepin County and the Met Council broadly asked for, and I believe, of course, the RFP was co-constructed with all of y'all and the other advisory committee members, is that we're thinking about both residential and, business displacement. And so we'd imagine that those members would come from that group. Now, CURA, of course, disclosing CURA has a lot of relationships within that community along this line. But we, of course, wouldn't want to just hand select members from our own process, like, hey, we want you, we want you, we want you, sort of behind this sort of black box where we sort of just decide the members that we want to group, that we want, that should be in this group. It obviously should be a public and transparent process. So I think one of the questions that I have for this group, and maybe y'all ready to talk about this now, or maybe you want to talk about this at the end of the presentation, but what would y'all view as sort of the most transparent and public process for selecting members of this group? Perhaps I've heard there's interest from this committee and other committee for members of these members to be within the anti-displacement work group. But I think it's also important to note that it's fully within our plan to come back to the business advisory committee and the community advisory committee and the other advisory committees to talk about the very same things. So we'll be presenting, I imagine, the same information in that group to this group. But I just want to hear from y'all before we sort of create a definitive plan around creating, I saw Felicia has her hand raised, before we, so that group is created, what y'all had in mind about the most transparent and fair process for that. So I think Felicia, your hand's raised maybe around that question, and maybe other members will chime in on that too.
Yes, thank you. Well, one of the things I've been thinking about even around the entire Blue Line project is like really almost this marketing campaign. And because when we talk about transparency, I think about like there's this proactive approach around like really trying to discover who you're not reaching to reach them so that they know, understand, and can make a decision around whatever the decision is, whether it's to support this whole anti-displacement work or whether it's to join in on the anti-displacement work. And so for sure in the engagement space, I know I'm seeing that what's great is that we have this diverse kind of group of sort of organizations that are working on that. So they're tapped into all these various intersections of the community. So I'm in Area 3, which is actually a very diverse area, North Minneapolis. And so us having like Asian media access, because they're always thinking about accessibility in that space and culturally specific ways to reach that intersection of our community. And not that it makes me lazy, but it actually adds to my ability or my network, right? So I'm looking at how they're actually promoting to this part of the community. So I think delving into how we're actually reaching everyone to let them know and finding ways to add to that engagement work that's already happening, because there is a lot of stuff happening and still people are kind of missing it. So there has been these talks about anti-displacement work. So in that, really elevating that not just that work, but elevating that people have an opportunity to join into it and what that really means. I think a lot of times when we ask people to join a committee, we're kind of like, there's this very formal, this is what the committee does. And what we're looking for you is like a 1 hour commitment every month, right? And really what it means probably is this 1 hour commitment, a few more hours of research probably. We might actually need you to make some phone calls too and think about some things. You might have to learn some stuff, but in the end, you know, this is like what our goal is. But really having this, in my mind, I'm thinking marketing campaign, because I don't know, like what we're doing is not enough.
Yeah.
There's got to be like this real intention. There are people who are experts in that sort of thing. So that's just the thing that was sticking out in my mind.
Yeah, hear you, love it. Add marketing campaign, add to work within the existing, and when you said engagement work, I assume you mean the engagement cohort, but probably maybe even more generally than that. And then I heard, like Asian Media Access, when I heard from that is like working through those other groups. These groups that are organizing in the corridor are generally just have constituencies of people within the corridor to get the word out about this, but also fully expressing all that's going into it. It's not just a 1 hour meeting. Indeed, there's going to be more than that around that too. Definitely. I wasn't sure if any other members had their hands up, had thoughts on that. Well, yeah, I think, and of course, this is the only time for y'all to chime in, and so hopefully when an email goes out with these materials too, we can ask that question too, so folks have comments on that as well. Yeah, I mean, I know for sure to what you're saying, Felice. I live within this corridor in North Minneapolis as well, and I know how much my neighbors are not talking about some of this work, and so the need to sort of more fully saturate this information and connecting people to this project, I can already just see from my own experience living within the corridor, is needed. So, yeah, we have, organizers on staff are connected into a lot of organizations that are doing this work. And we definitely intend to, I think, follow a lot of what you said, Felicia, plus more. But we'll talk about that more. We'll make sure we fully communicate that with this group before the word goes out to sort of check in about that plan and make sure that we're headed to solid ground around setting up that group for success. But that group will sort of exist alongside these advisory committees as sort of a recipient of CURA's work and directors of CURA's work. And yeah, I mean, of course, reporting back to that group and sort of living into it. When I get into sort of the research plan and the projects, I kind of really see how we're integrating both that group and these groups into the context of the work. Just checking time, I'm going to jump forward. I'd put this slide in because this is something that we talk about a lot. I talk about a lot when sort of advising governments about like how do we get to more equitable transit decision making and sort of what are our principles around that. And I didn't change the slide because I just wanted to communicate the same message as I always communicate it as sort of principles that we're living into. So one, our hope is to build communities' capacity to understand transportation more complexly. In this case, understand displacement more complexly. So to Mike, what you're saying, I'm coming in this for the first time. I don't want to just simplify things for you. I do want to start at the beginning so that you're not missing anything. But hopefully the hope is that things are more complex for you to sort of really make complex recommendations to very complex problems. Our work is centered around resourcing, community organizing, and groups. And so obviously, the anti-displacement work group in your communities exists, but we're also thinking about other folks in community too, and this work being a resource, not just for the purpose of this project, but to understand transit and displacement in general. If we give ourselves months to understand and develop a project, we're not just going to give you a couple hours to understand and comment, right? If we as professionals, it takes us a while to understand something, we know it's going to take community even more time to be able to sort of have the same agency that we have around that very same topic. And then we know, of course, when ideas and concerns go beyond the scope of the project, we don't want to just leave those things and say, hey, that's not within this project. we really want to plug in with all the project partners here where they might carry some of that stuff too. So just kind of to state those sort of principles of what we feel are really important to equitable decision making, and we want to carry that in the context of this project. Two more specifically, so I know I set up a lot of like, this is our framework. I think sometimes frameworks, in my view, and this might just be the philosophy academic that's within me, setting up the framework of how we're doing this work, I think sometimes is more important than saying what we're going to do. But to what we're going to do, what we presented, Ed and Brittany in particular, Dr. Lewis, sort of framed up a research plan that sort of are centered around these particular questions. So one, we want to do a review of best practices in anti-displacement policy locally and nationally. So not just what's happening within this community, but what are folks doing to address displacement in general. So not just in the context of China, but in general, what are these practices around anti-displacement? We want to do a case study of the existing blue and green lines and their effects on displacement of residents and businesses. What are the lessons from the existing blue and green lines, right? So what did businesses, residents experience along those lines? We want to do some study around that. A thorough baseline study of the Blue Line Extension corridor. So within that, we're talking about who lives on this corridor, you know, what are the different demographics, what are the businesses, what are the makeup of them, what do they view as their vulnerabilities or their barriers towards sort of success in general. That will sort of coexist alongside, you know, what did businesses and residents along the Blue Line, existing Blue and Green lines sort of need, both in the context of before, during planning, during construction, and after, right? And so I really think about those three different phases of the project, and there's going to be different needs and barriers within each of those, right? The development of policy recommendations based on findings in 1 through 4 above. So ultimately taking those different elements of those different studies to get to particular outcomes, right? Y'all aren't just here to sort of wax poetic about the possibility or existence of a problem, but ultimately Hennepin County and the Met Council and the different governments along the line want to know what can they do about it, right? And so we want to get to that very, very practical place. And 6, the development of indicators for residents and business displacement along the Blue Line extension as a means of monitoring impact over time. So important lesson that is both during planning, during construction, and after implementation. So we know that, of course, that once the alignment is announced, people are already going to start thinking about what's happening or start sort of acting upon that information. And so we want to have, of course, indicators that sort of indicate to all of you and these governments going forward about the existence of displacement going forward. Ed, was there anything more that you want? I'm sure there's a lot more to say about it, but I know we're probably running short on time. Ed, did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to add that, you know, our research approach is going to be a mixed methods approach. I think each one of those items that you see on this slide suggests a different research approach. And so we will be engaging in-person interviews, in focus group. We will be doing quantitative analysis of housing market data, ACS and census data. I think that I just wanted to point that out, that as I said, each one of these items here probably will entail a slightly different research approach.
I'm kind of, there's a little bit more to it, so I'm sure there are questions, but just kind of fully flesh out some of the things. So I just wanted to tie back, you know, to our initial reparative justice approach and what that sort of means as we wrote about it in the context of research. So in contextualization, we want to recall what's already been said by community BIPOC in particular. So we know BIPOC folks are particularly vulnerable to displacement. That has been engaging on the Blue Line extension for years, and particularly what they said they needed to ensure Blue Line extension that the Blue Line extension benefits existing residents, so address harm that has already occurred as a result of Blue Line extension work, namely in Harrison and other parts of North Minneapolis, but of course we're caring for Robbinsdale and Crystal and Brooklyn Park as well. Detail the history of disinvestment and exclusion in marginalized communities along the planned Blue Line extension route. We want to study the existing Blue Line and Green Line planning, construction, and after operation impacts on vulnerable communities and populations as a case study for what can be expected to happen during Blue Line Extension planning, construction, and operation. And we want to conduct demographic analysis of vulnerable populations on housing and businesses along the corridor. So hopefully, to the member that talked about like what are the changing characterizations that are possible, we want to get to some of that within here. Then community-centered, we want to connect the anti-displacement work group with organizing in community around displacement issues. So we know that there's a lot of folks talking about this. And to what Felicia said, even more people want to talk, more people should be talking and organizing around this in community. So it's not just engaging, right, work groups, it's engaging community and community organizing around displacement issues along the corridor. We want to center our research work as a capacity building tool for vulnerable community members to develop clear vision about what kind of anti-displacement investments and policies would best protect and uplift them. And we want to convene the anti-displacement work group with other project stakeholders to build a shared analysis of the problems that exist, develop shared intent on how to address those issues, and expand the capacity for vulnerable community to have power over the vision of the Blue Line Extension, right? So it's, if we talked about to say, what's the definition of displacement? I think if we asked everybody that question, even though everybody's here to address displacement, we probably get as many members, as many different definitions of displacement. So getting to that place of shared analysis, shared definition, shared intent, I think is critically important. And of course, we mean not just community members, we mean that with Hennepin County staff and electeds, with the different cities elected staff, the Met Councils, staff and commissioners, right? We want all those groups to sort of view things the same way and have a shared intent on how to address those issues. And so our process is built to build a mutual accepted vision or a mutual vision of what's happening here. And so really centering it in community and the project stakeholders and the people who are most impacted at the front and center. And then reparative, so we ultimately want to assist community residents, government staff, and others in developing an achievable vision to prevent displacement along the Blue Line Extension corridor, including a recommendation for how Hennepin County, the Met Council, and city governments can allocate investment and enact policy around the Blue Line Extension to prevent displacement. We want a recommendation for how governments, foundations, and others can operationalize anti-displacement work internally. We want to create accessible and commonly understandable materials for the complex work that the anti-displacement work group is doing to share with the general public. We want to develop indicators for along the line to monitor signs of displacement. We want to advise and facilitate a structure of accountability that is mutual between community residents and organizations and the relevant government agencies. So how do we not just leave this process with, hey, here are recommendations, hopefully they do it, but we also want to leave with sort of a structure for how does community and government sort of stay engaged in a structure of accountability for them to sort of see through the important and challenging work that's in front of us. So we should also expect that at the beginning of the research process, including right now, CURA will continue to collaborate with community partners to develop a more robust research agenda to allow them to be fully capacitated to create an anti-displacement vision that matches their needs. In other words, there will likely be more to this research agenda as the community identifies their needs to be full participants in this process. So what I hope that what y'all take from this, not just what I'm presenting, but you read through our proposal and look through our research agenda, which it gives up more details in the proposal, and say, hey, I need to know the answer to this in order for me to really do what we're talking about here. That's what we fully expect and mean by co-creation. So where are we missing, right? To the member that talked about, hey, I really want to know the different characteristics or the ways that this community's characters can change because of industrialization. We need to make sure we care for that within our research and action plan as an information downloaded in this process. And so we envision that the research plan will expand depending on what community and different advisory committees will say about it. That's the first thing we'll do. So we want to, of course, be working alongside organizing in community, so co-developing expanded research, a co-expanded research agenda. We want to convene community and governmental stakeholders to process and participate in research in the work of the anti-displacement work group. And we want to convene a process to develop recommendations for anti-displacement investment and policy. and working with the various governments on an implementation plan ultimately. So plan outcomes, a research report that details displacement risk. We want a developed constituency both in community and government, namely Hennepin County and the Met Council, to do anti-displacement work. We want a recommended plan for Hennepin County investment and policy to prevent displacement along the Blue Line Extension Corridor. A recommendation for Hennepin County, the Met Council, and city governments investments to address other negative externalities of the Blue Line, and guidance on implementation of recommendations for Hennepin County and the Met Council. So it was kind of a struggle to get everything in a short amount of time. I guess I just want to stop there for any questions that folks might have. Here, oh, looks like somehow you can see the project schedule. But maybe I'll stop there for any questions. It seems like maybe folks are dropping out of the meeting, so right at 9 o'clock. But maybe just a pause there if any folks have any comments.
We have until 9:30.
Oh, okay, okay. Any thoughts that folks might have right now?
Hi, this is Felicia. I'm wondering if similar sort of presentations are anticipated when you're doing some of that engagement work in community. And the reason being is because I do think that even the way that it's presented today, I'm following along just fine at this point. I do, one of my first things though is like, oh, this is a lot of words. I need this so I can go read it later, you know? So I'm just thinking about even just my own accessibility and ability to process. So just wondering that out loud and hoping that there are going to be other ways to kind of frame it for community as well. Could probably even be in that same, you know, however you all structure it, but just wanting to make sure I'm keeping at the forefront how we can make sure that it's digestible. Because also, you know, I'm one of the people inviting community to watch back these public meetings, and because it's been, you know, a space that I know that archives some of these discussions and conversations so that they can go back and get context. And so I don't want them to glaze over or anything like that, because it's super important information, especially for those of us who are saying, hey, okay, we have to work with this group to figure this thing out. And I just want to make sure that we can fully communicate to each other and have that space to process too.
Yes.
And it'll probably need to be facilitated in that space. But yeah.
Yeah, yes, Alicia, I hear that 100%. Yeah, I mean, we definitely, you know, even the proposal, I don't view as like prime time or like as a good tool to communicate with community about the work that's happening. So I think we definitely do need to do more thinking, especially as we get to a broader public group about how to sort of, again, not lose complexity about what we're doing, but to sort of, you know, present it in not as boring way, which I admit I think I'm fully more boring on Zoom or WebEx than I think how we want to be in person. So that's, you know, if as we expect as we're going to continue in the pandemic, we need to, yeah, really figure out how to communicate complex information in a way, if it is going to be through the form. I don't think it'll be solely through the form of you know, online or through these Zoom or WebEx meetings. But yeah, I hear that, and we'll definitely get this information out. I'm a little bit failing in doing this because of my inability to sort of navigate WebEx as easily as some of these other. But we'll definitely get all this information out in a document to you. And you know, like I said, me and you, we should sit down and have coffee, and I want to sit down with all of you and also find better ways to sort of maybe package this information, because if you want to take it into your constituencies of people, what's the best form of doing that? So definitely want to talk about that with all of y'all in more detail, for sure.
Terrence, I'm more looking forward to, and I'm comfortable with Felicia. There's all this stuff to read and all this stuff that I'm looking forward to living this. Okay, I want to live this for a while. All right, because I'm a little slow, and it may take a little while to get into me, but I want to be a part of it, and I want to be engaged in it, because that's the only way I'm going to learn.
Yeah, hear that for sure. The many different ways of learning. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of living to happen that we're very soon on the precipice of doing. I guess I'll just conclude. So there's a project schedule.
Hold on, C Terrence, could I just interrupt really quickly? This is Jim Vole with the city of Minneapolis. So hello, it's good to see you again. I like what I've seen laid out here. And I have confidence in you guys as a team to think through things. So don't take this, I don't want you all to take this the wrong way, but one of the concerns I have with this project, the LRT project, historically, I've been working on it since 2011, and other projects I work on, is we usually hire consultants because there's in part because there's a bigger problem that's hard for us to answer. And then a lot of times when we get to the end of the report, it tends to be what I call the Google list. You know, here's a list of things that you can Google about anti-displacement, like do housing strategies, do business strategies, look at TIF. But they don't think about how TIF works in the city of Minneapolis or how it works in Hennepin County or whatever. I mean, that I don't know if that's a good example or not, but I just want to challenge the team. And again, I think you guys have the ability to do this. You've got a long record, but I want to challenge the team to think when we get to the end, when it comes to recommendations for the cities and the counties, that it not just, I know you can't write legislation, but that it's not just some Google list of, hey, anti-displacement strategies are housing assistance, business assistance, but that there's some thought about how it works in the individual communities. And so at any rate, I just wanted to reiterate that again. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to hear from you. Yep, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why we brought the Housing Justice Center specifically as a project partner, because that is their specific expertise, is the laws and policies of cities and communities in this place. And so, yeah, we want to get to that specific end of not just generally these policies, but yeah, specifically how would they work within this context. So I'm going to hold that, honor it, and I think you're spot on. So absolutely.
If I could also say something, I think that we did envision the recommendation stage of this as being a collective process as well, and saw that our role would be primarily to bring ideas to a group and then go through exactly the kinds of issues that that you were mentioning, which is, does this work in this context? Is this an applicable idea for the local area? So anyways, very good point, and appreciate it. Thanks.
Hey, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is Chris. Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback on Jim's and the follow-up question. And maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I guess it's sort of how I sort of formulate the last couple of comments, and maybe the team is already thinking about this, but where my mind goes is thinking about some of the evaluation metrics post construction. So I mean, I know we're talking about recommendations and such that might come as a result of this engagement, but I guess I'm curious to know if there was any thought process within maybe even the contract as it relates to metrics and evaluation and ongoing evaluation after the line is built, while it's being built, after it's built, and sort of understanding the displacement in totality.
Yeah, thanks. That's I'm gonna ask that, Chris, at New Rules.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yep, I can hear it in the deep voice. Yeah, Chris, thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know if there was a question in there, or at least I might have missed a question that was in there, but
Well,
yeah, I did.
I mean, I would say in response that item number 6 on the work list that you gave was the creation of indicators of displacement. That was meant to be a forward-looking kind of document and tool for monitoring the ongoing and future effects of the extensions. So I think that may be what you're talking about, which is that there be in place at the end of this some way of thinking about continuing to monitor changes going on as a result of the extension. So that's what that item was.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Just to sort of, this document will go out. I don't think it's hugely important, but there's this document that's the work plan schedule with the major tasks spread over 18 months. This document will go out. I can't scroll down for some reason in sharing this document, even though I can see it. I'm scrolling down on my screen. But when you look at that document, you'll see where all of the major times in each of the different studies will be coming back, or the different information will be coming back, and sort of the topic of the conversation will be coming in. But the important thing that I want to note is that there's a lot of months where we don't have anything written into. And certainly what's written in there doesn't embody like sort of a full schedule for that particular meeting. And that's intentional because we want to leave places for catch up and slow down, or new items that will be identified by work group members. And of course, in addition to that, there will be a lot of activity in community around those same items around that same time. And so I think, so for folks who are going to look into these documents after this meeting, looking at that document, you can see when we'll be talking about different topics, or when different aspects will be coming into it, and how that will feed ultimately into the recommendation at the end too. So just know that we built in a lot of stretch time for y'all to sort of ask questions that aren't already planned for, or for new items, or to slow down on items that may take longer for folks to really sort of seep into. And so we're planning for that already. We're not overloading already, so that there's no room for space for community to live into what is necessary for them. So I definitely presented a lot, and I'm hoping that y'all will, once we get these documents to y'all, we'll read them. I fully expect to be spending a lot of time with y'all. We're setting aside time. If you want to do one-to-one, let's get coffee, whatever it is, to sort of really dig into these details. But I think to what you're saying, Mike, I think there's a lot that we're going to live into and sort of experience. Sort of the first things first, we'll be getting the anti-displacement work group. And so for folks to think about that, in addition to what Felicia said in this meeting about what's the sort of the most transparent and public way of getting that group together. But that will be, I think, of the first things to do. And then the second thing is sort of fully fleshing out the research agenda. So folks sort of have commentary or desires around that. Are sort of the first two things that are at the top of our list to do within the context of this project. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any more comments or questions. We're going to be talking a lot over the next 18 months. So of course this isn't the end. But yeah.
So like C. Terrence said, we can definitely get all this material out to the committee. We'll also post it online for those that want to share it with your constituencies. I can stop talking because I think Felicia raised her hand. Otherwise, I can kind of move us on to the next agenda item, but I don't want to cut off any discussion that we have with C. Terrence and the CURA team.
No, all good. Oh, well, actually, I did have this question because I've had a couple of people ask me, and I'm not exactly sure. So, when it comes to the anti-displacement work group, I don't know that it's been decided exactly who it would be comprised of. I think we've talked about what makes sense. And I'd love to get a better idea, or I don't know if there's like, it needs to be space within some of these committees where that decision's made, but to get a better idea, because we've been talking about, we're going to have this anti-displacement work group for a few months now. And so there are people in community who are interested and wanting to see if they're eligible to tap in, or, or how they can into that particular work.
Yeah, and I think it's, oh, sorry. Or something. Okay. So yeah, I think it hasn't been fully decided exactly how the membership is, like, what's the process for getting members on. Just nobody that I think is not eligible, like that's in, in community. And another thing that I'm thinking about, that I was talking about with the project team, is to what extent do we want electeds and staff, maybe not to be like work group members, but to be participants at the meeting. And I also think about philanthropy folks too as being, participants at the meeting too, because I'm thinking a lot about building that shared analysis. Like, because I think one of the constructs that doesn't tend to work well is like a group of communities just kind of in a room talking amongst themselves, and they get to this recommendation, and then staff members who will be receiving that recommendation haven't been part of the process, and then they might disagree, and then there's already a tension between like, hey, I recommended this, is this something that y'all are going to carry forward? So instead of getting to that point, is like, how do we build that shared intent, that shared analysis with those people who will be receiving the recommendation from that group and other groups along the way too. So thinking about that, who ultimately that will be the participants, work group members, I think is kind of a dynamic that's in my head. But then of course, like, yeah, getting the marketing and that you talked about, like the connecting with the engagement group to recruit members to like, I don't want to say apply, like, hey, am I good enough to get into this group? But like how we select out of all the interest that's there. So I think the decision hasn't been made. So let's definitely talk more about, like, if you have like a vision for like elements that need to be part of that, let's talk about that offline, kind of intentionally, and like holding back until I sort of hear from all of y'all about the best way to move forward. Because I think there's a ton of interest, and so we're gonna have to just make sense within all of that. Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like we got a good first introduction. Obviously, we'll need the team to come back quite a bit to this committee to kind of move us through, and we can also set up time, separately to dive into this more. The committee hasn't done very many special sessions, but it's always an option on the table that we can explore as we go through the work, especially if you have questions that you need to be around a table and just like talk through for a while. We have about 10 minutes left in the meeting, and just want to move us kind of quickly to the next agenda item. Sam is going to kind of pull us through a little bit, right? So we started last month to talk about some of the data that we're using to evaluate the project, and Sam's going to kind of walk us through how that relates to the project goals that you guys helped us set quite a while ago. And then I just have some dates of upcoming meetings that we're starting to set. It's kind of that last check to make sure that those dates aren't on like super important community event days that I wasn't aware of. So even if we don't get to them, they're the last slide, and we'll send them out. So just given the limited amount of time, if you see the dates in the slides and they're like, oh, we scheduled this on this date, just let me know. We're trying to have a flyer together for this weekend of upcoming things. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and hand it off to Sam.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Just want to thank everybody for the discussion and creating this space for the anti-displacement work. I think this is well anticipated work, and we're really excited and looking forward to working with everybody here as we move forward. And I think, if anything, as I listen to C. Terrence, I love the fact that this is not something that the Met Council or Hennepin County is leading, right? This comes to a lot of authenticity by having an organization that brings a lot of their research to this, and we are learning just as well in how we can be part of the solution. This is going to be really hard to do in just the few minutes that we have left, so I'm just going to touch on this to really just kind of give an overview. Felisa, your words are in my head right now about giving ourselves some time and space to talk a little bit about this more thoroughly, but just wanted to share with the group today and spend just 1 or 2 minutes to just touch on, we're not forgetting about some of the good work that we're hearing about from community members about how do we get ourselves into a decision-making mode as we look at some of our alignment options that we have in front of you. So Sophia said, we worked earlier on about this time last year about principles both for the route and for the engagement. So basically saying kind of looking back at our principles is that we definitely are interested in making sure that this meets the Federal Transit Administration New Starts criteria, that we want to maintain the existing alignment as much as possible, and clearly mitigate any negative impacts about the project. So this conversation today is super helpful for that as well. And then on the engagement side, make sure we're really meaningful, engaged stakeholders. And I think this group, as well as our community advisory committee and the cohort group and the corridor management committee, has really put really good definition about what that means, about how do we meaningfully engage and be transparent in there as well. And then ensuring that the work that we do is really centered in the community's experience, and making sure that we are moving towards equity and reducing those disparities. So we do have some project goals that help inform and support those principles, and those goals themselves are actually going to be translated into some of the technical information. So we can bring that forward to the committees, we can bring that forward to the public as we look at our next round of opportunities to work more closely together through the workshops to see what that actually looks like. So this first goal, improve transit access and connections to jobs to regional destinations. Just want to kind of pull that out a little bit. So Sophia, if we can move to we can move to the next slide. And what we heard from community members is how is that articulated? And how it's articulated is maximizing our transit access to housing and employment, schools, community services, healthcare facilities, really the assets of the community basically, and making sure that those destinations are connected for our residents, for our businesses in a very meaningful way. And how that is expressed in terms of some of that technical information as we move to the next slide, because again, we're about serving people and really maximizing the opportunity to serve people and destinations. Looks like we might have a glitch here for the next slide. There we go. Great. Thank you so much. So this population density gives us an indication of how many of our residents are served, and that is going to come into the evaluation, right? So we will be able to quantify this information as we kind of move through the rest of this year, and bringing this forward and being able to share with the community members and saying, here's what these lines are doing on the map in terms of residents served. So density is one of those pieces that can come into that, and you can see where just on this high level where some of that intensity is actually occurring, particularly as we look on the southern portion of this corridor as we begin to connect with the blue line as we travel to downtown Minneapolis. So we have heard from community members that that is going to be helpful in their own decision making, and we're bringing this forward again, like I said, in the workshops. Also, another piece of information that is going to be shared with community members and our advisory committees again to help us frame this, to help inform the decision making, is lower and higher income job density. And we have a couple of heat maps here. I know we're just having some technical difficulties here to pull it up, but just give a sense of folks of what that actually looks like. So rest assured, it's not just a blank screen. We actually have some good looking maps here if we can pull that up. There we go. Excellent, thank you. So, so again, the data that's going to help inform our decision making. This is another example of that, lower and higher income job density. So we have a couple of maps here, one showing where folks are making less than 40,000 annually, and then where folks are earning more than 40,000 annually. So it just gives a sense of like our potential impact to create opportunities for community members and really begin to quantify that information as well. And the next piece I think really works really nicely with what C. Terrence and his team is pulling together, and we can actually begin to reflect this in part of the research and the decision making early on with the project. So goal 6 is to advance local and regional equity and work towards reducing racial disparities and really identify opportunities to invest in historically disinvested communities. So what does that look like to us in bringing data into the project and really helping us in our decision making is understanding where did historic redlining and racial covenants actually existed. So we're bringing, again, this data, a little hard to see today. It's we will go through this again through as this work advances, and particularly in our community workshops in November. But just wanted to share that this is information that is not only coming together for us, but is also going to help our conversations with anti-displacement and beginning to think about how we get around that a little bit more. And if we could just go to the next slide, again, an incredible piece that is going to be helpful for us is beginning to understand where households have access to vehicles as being a user of transit and the success on that and being able to provide those services as well. So again, touching at this as a very high level, we will bring this more, but we have been asked about what type of data are we looking at, how are we bringing that into the process, and we just wanted to share some of that with you. Looking forward to our continued conversation on this. I know we're getting close to time here, and I do want Sophia to highlight a couple of our next outreach activities and working with communities. So if you have any questions, let's definitely connect, but in the last couple of minutes, I will hand this back to Sophia.
I'm already off mute. There you go. So that was a lot of information for Sam to walk through really quickly. You know, we will dive into that more as we go into the next months, but that's, you know, what we want everybody to kind of let you know what we're working towards and what the data is starting to look like. So with that, we have a couple things kind of coming up in November. In the end of October, and you know, this kind of phase that we're entering is that we want the community to have basically all these major pieces of information. What could the rail look like in your community? How does it all fit? What are the options? You know, with that, a lot of the technical items don't necessarily need to be decided by the time we get to the report or to a route recommendation. But it's that full transparency piece. And so we already had a open house in Crystal to kind of talk about specifically like the Bass Lake Road area and just kind of how the work is advancing there. We have one upcoming in Robbinsdale at the end of the month, and then we'd be working towards multiple in Minneapolis in the beginning of November. We also, not on this list, but definitely part of it is a Shiloh will also be hosting us in the evening on November 9th, and we'll kind of get that out. But a combination of kind of workshops, like come in with us, look at options, talk about what works, tell us if we hit the mark, miss the mark, all that kind of stuff. And as well as just like those drop-in office hours. So kind of just being available for folks to kind of, you know, come and talk with project staff, get into very specific items with us and all that kind of stuff. So we will get flyers out for both of these separately to the committee once they're ready. They should be ready sometime this week. And so you have them, but if you see any of the dates that are conflicting with things that we're not following, just let us know. But otherwise, we should be kind of going with that. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody better. But the last thing to note is that our regularly scheduled meeting is on November 2nd, which is election day. Not all communities have, a lot of communities have some kind of small, but definitely the city of Minneapolis has a big one. And so we don't want to take committee time when people might be wanting to get out and vote. So we are recommending that we push our next BAC back a week.
That works.
Okay, I would say any final comments or words from our chairs? Otherwise, we can move to adjourn.
I say we move to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Second.
Sounds like we're adjourned.
Everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Liz, let me know if you have the chat and I'll end the meeting for everybody.